You don't belong in first class, sir. The words rang across the quiet cabin with the confidence of someone who believed they would never be questioned. Conversation stopped. A flight attendant holding a tablet stepped into the aisle, her practiced smile replaced by a look of certainty as she blocked the path of a tall black man dressed in a plain charcoal polo, dark jeans, and clean white sneakers. Marcus Ellington didn't raise his voice. He didn't sigh. He simply looked at the boarding pass still resting between his fingers before meeting her eyes with the calm expression of a man who had spent a lifetime watching strangers mistake appearance for identity. Around him, passengers turned just enough to witness the unfolding scene without pretending they weren't watching. A businessman in an expensive navy suit leaned toward his wife and whispered something that earned a quiet laugh. Another traveler glanced back at Marcus, then at the polished leather seats, silently deciding he looked out of place. The cabin, moments earlier filled with the soft hum of overhead vents and the clink of coffee cups, suddenly felt smaller, tighter, charged with invisible assumptions. My boarding pass says 2A, Marcus answered evenly. The flight attendant barely glanced at it. There must be some mistake. Economy is through that curtain. She gestured toward the back of the aircraft as though directing traffic rather than dismissing a paying passenger. Marcus remained exactly where he stood. He had seen this look before. Not once. Not twice. More times than he cared to count. It was the same quiet certainty that had followed him into luxury hotels, private clubs, and boardrooms long before anyone knew the name Marcus Ellington. Success had changed his bank account, his influence, and the companies under his leadership, but it had never completely erased the assumptions waiting behind someone else's first impression. A young man across the aisle lowered his headphones just enough to listen. An older woman folded her magazine onto her lap. Even the first-class cabin seemed to hold its breath. "Sir, we really don't have time for this," another crew member said as he approached with measured steps. "If you're looking for your seat, we'll gladly help you find it." Marcus offered the boarding pass again. "I'm already standing next to it." The second crew member looked at the ticket for less than a second before handing it back. "Please cooperate." The businessman who had laughed earlier finally spoke loud enough for several rows to hear. "Some people always think the rules don't apply to them." A few passengers nodded. Others looked away, unwilling to become part of the moment but unwilling to stop watching it either. Marcus noticed every face without lingering on any of them. He had boarded alone by choice. No assistant. No security. No tailored suit announcing status before he spoke. That decision had been intentional. For months, customer complaints had crossed executive desks describing passengers judged by clothing instead of confirmation numbers, by skin color instead of seat assignments. Reports had been dismissed as isolated misunderstandings. Marcus preferred evidence over assumptions. This morning, he intended to find the truth with his own eyes. He simply hadn't expected the truth to greet him before he even reached his seat. The lead flight attendant folded her arms. "I'm asking you one last time to step aside so we can continue boarding." Marcus slipped his boarding pass back into its sleeve with slow, deliberate precision. His face revealed nothing, but somewhere behind that calm expression, a decision had already been made, and within the next 15 minutes, a single phone call would begin changing the future of everyone standing in that aisle. Marcus neither stepped backward nor forward. He simply remained where he was, allowing the silence to become louder than any argument could have been. Around him, passengers shifted in their seats, pretending to organize carry-on bags while stealing curious glances toward the growing confrontation. The lead flight attendant interpreted his composure as hesitation instead of confidence. "Sir, delaying boarding is not going to change the outcome," she said with professional firmness. Marcus nodded politely. "Neither will making assumptions." His answer was calm enough to confuse her. She had expected frustration, excuses, perhaps even an emotional reaction. Instead, she faced someone who seemed completely comfortable letting the moment unfold exactly as it was. That quiet confidence unsettled her more than raised voices ever could. Marcus had dressed exactly as planned that morning. The charcoal polo came from a neighborhood store he had visited for years. His jeans were clean but ordinary. His shoes were comfortable enough for a cross-country flight. The luxury watch that financial magazines often photographed on his wrist rested inside a desk drawer back home. His executive security team had been instructed not to accompany him. Even his personal assistant believed he was taking a private day away from meetings. Every decision had served one purpose. He wanted to experience the airline exactly as thousands of customers experienced it every single day. 6 months earlier, anonymous customer surveys had begun landing on his desk. Some described outstanding service. Others told remarkably similar stories. Travelers claimed they had been questioned because of simple clothing. Some said they had been asked twice for identification while others walked through without interruption. Several complaints mentioned first class specifically. Internal reports labeled each incident as a misunderstanding. Marcus had spent his career learning that repeated misunderstandings often revealed a larger truth. That was why he was standing alone instead of arriving with photographers, executives, or public relations advisors. He wanted honesty, even if honesty proved uncomfortable. A younger flight attendant standing several rows behind the lead attendant quietly watched the exchange. She frowned for a brief moment before looking down at the tablet in her hands. Something about the reservation number looked familiar. Before she could speak, the lead attendant motioned for another crew member to continue boarding around Marcus as though he were nothing more than misplaced luggage delaying departure. A white-haired gentleman seated near the window finally cleared his throat. If the man's ticket is valid, perhaps someone should verify it before assuming otherwise. His voice was measured, neither hostile nor supportive, simply reasonable. The lead attendant offered a courteous smile that never reached her eyes. "Thank you, sir. We are following company procedures." Marcus recognized that phrase immediately. Procedures. Policies. Protocols. Words that often sounded fair until someone decided who deserved the benefit of them. He glanced through the aircraft windows where the afternoon sunlight reflected across the terminal. Ground crews moved with practiced efficiency, unaware that a far different operation was beginning just a few feet above them. Marcus had visited hundreds of airports throughout his career, yet this flight mattered more than most international business trips. Numbers on quarterly reports revealed profits. Experiences like this revealed character. A few rows ahead, a young mother quietly leaned toward her teenage daughter. "Watch carefully," she whispered. "How people treat strangers tells you who they really are." Marcus heard every word without turning his head. He appreciated the observation, but he remained focused on the crew surrounding him. They still believed they were evaluating a passenger. None of them realized they were participating in an evaluation themselves, one that would soon extend far beyond the cabin doors and into offices where every decision carried consequences measured not in emotions, but in accountability. The lead flight attendant glanced toward the boarding door and gave a subtle nod. Within seconds another uniformed supervisor walked into the first-class cabin carrying a tablet with the quiet confidence of someone who believed technology would immediately settle the matter. He stopped in front of Marcus and offered a brief professional smile before looking down at the screen. "May I see your boarding pass one more time?" he asked. Marcus handed it over without hesitation. The supervisor scanned the barcode once. Then again. His eyebrows narrowed for only a fraction of a second before his expression returned to neutral. "The system is taking a moment to refresh," he explained. The lead flight attendant folded her arms. "I told you there was a problem." Marcus remained calm. "Or perhaps there is a problem with the conclusion, not the system." The supervisor avoided responding. Instead he tapped several more fields on the screen while passengers continued watching from every direction. A middle-aged businessman seated across the aisle shook his head. "If this were my flight, I would already be sitting down instead of arguing." Another passenger answered quietly, "He has not argued once." Those few words hung in the air longer than anyone expected. The contrast had become impossible to ignore. Marcus had never raised his voice. Every assumption had come from someone else. The supervisor finally looked up. Sir, we are unable to confirm your assignment immediately. We need you to step aside while we finish boarding. Marcus asked a simple question. Can you confirm that my ticket is invalid? The supervisor hesitated. Not at this moment. Can you confirm it is valid? Another pause. Not at this moment. Marcus nodded once. Then we are both waiting for the same answer. The lead flight attendant exhaled impatiently. You are making this much more difficult than it needs to be. Marcus replied, facts are usually much simpler than assumptions. Several rows behind them, the younger flight attendant quietly reopened the passenger manifest on her own device. She searched the seat assignments again, this time entering the confirmation number manually instead of relying on the automatic display. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly before she checked the information a second time. She did not speak yet. She wanted to be absolutely certain. Near the boarding door, a gate agent stepped inside after receiving a message from the cabin crew. Is everything all right? She asked. The lead flight attendant answered before anyone else could. We have a passenger attempting to occupy a first-class seat that we cannot verify. Marcus looked toward the gate agent. That is an interesting description. My boarding pass has never changed. The gate agent accepted the document, examined it carefully, then compared the flight number, departure time and confirmation code. Nothing appeared unusual. Still, sensing the tension around her, she chose caution over certainty. Perhaps we should have airport customer service review this before departure, she suggested. The businessman who had mocked Marcus earlier smiled with satisfaction as though the recommendation confirmed his opinion. An elderly woman sitting near the window quietly frowned. It sounds to me like everyone is reviewing the passenger except the evidence. No one answered her. Outside, the jet bridge remained connected as the scheduled departure time drew closer. Inside, every passing minute tightened the atmosphere another notch. The crew believed they were protecting the integrity of the cabin. Marcus understood something they did not. Character often revealed itself most clearly when people believed no one important was watching, and at that very moment every decision, every word, and every assumption was creating a record far more valuable than any report waiting on an executive's desk. The younger flight attendant stared at her tablet a third time, her heartbeat quickening with every line she reread. The confirmation number matched. The passenger name matched. Seat 2 Alpha remained assigned exactly where the boarding pass said it should be. She looked from the screen to Marcus, then back again, hoping she had overlooked something. She had not. Taking a careful step forward, she cleared her throat. Excuse me, she said softly. Every head turned toward her. The lead flight attendant frowned before she even spoke another word. I manually searched the reservation, the younger attendant continued. His boarding pass appears to match the passenger manifest. A brief silence settled over the cabin. It was not relief. It was resistance. The lead flight attendant answered almost immediately. There are system glitches every day. We cannot rely on a single search result. The younger attendant hesitated but refused to retreat. I checked it 3 different ways. The supervisor extended his hand. Let me see your tablet. She passed it over without argument. He reviewed the information for several seconds before locking the screen and handing it back. There may be an internal synchronization delay, he announced, choosing uncertainty over acknowledgement. Marcus watched the exchange without interrupting. His expression remained unchanged, but inside he recognized a familiar pattern. Facts had entered the room, yet assumptions still carried more authority than evidence. Across the aisle, an older gentleman wearing the cap of a retired Air Force veteran slowly stood. He rested one hand on the seat in front of him and spoke with the quiet confidence that comes from decades of experience. Young lady, he said to the trainee, are you telling us his ticket appears legitimate? She nodded carefully. Yes, sir. That is what I found. The veteran turned toward the crew. Then perhaps he deserves the same courtesy every passenger expects. Verify the information before deciding he does not belong. A woman seated near the window folded her newspaper and added, "That sounds reasonable to me." The businessman who had criticized Marcus earlier rolled his eyes. Or perhaps everyone should stop delaying the flight over one seat. The older woman answered before Marcus could. It stopped being about one seat the moment people decided appearances mattered more than facts. Several passengers exchanged uneasy glances. No one applauded. No one argued loudly. Yet something subtle shifted throughout the cabin. People who had remained silent began paying closer attention. They were no longer watching an inconvenience. They were watching a choice unfold in real time. The gate agent looked toward the supervisor. "Would you like me to contact operations?" she asked. Before he could answer, the lead flight attendant shook her head. "Not yet. We can resolve this here." Marcus finally spoke again, his voice measured and steady. "Then let us resolve it with accuracy." The trainee looked at him for the first time since the confrontation began. There was no anger in his face. No satisfaction that someone had supported him. Only patience. That unsettled her even more than the confrontation itself. Most passengers in his position would have become frustrated long ago. Instead, he seemed willing to let everyone reveal exactly who they were. The supervisor glanced toward the cockpit, clearly weighing whether to involve additional personnel. Departure time slipped another minute farther away. Outside the aircraft windows, baggage carts continued moving beneath the afternoon sun while inside the cabin an entirely different journey had begun. It was no longer a disagreement over a boarding pass. It had become a quiet test of integrity, and for the first time since Marcus entered the aisle, someone inside the uniform had chosen evidence over assumption. It was only one voice, but in a room filled with certainty, one honest voice had begun to change the direction of the story. The supervisor took one slow breath before making a decision that immediately changed the atmosphere inside the cabin. "Sir, until operations completes a final verification, I am asking you to step into the jet bridge so boarding can continue." His words remained courteous, but their meaning was unmistakable. Marcus looked toward seat 2 Alpha only a few feet away, then back at the supervisor. "You are asking me to leave the seat printed on my boarding pass without confirming that I have done anything wrong?" The supervisor answered carefully. "I am asking for your cooperation." Marcus nodded almost imperceptibly. "I have cooperated from the moment I stepped onto this aircraft." No one could honestly disagree. Every request for identification had been met. Every question had been answered. Every document had been presented without hesitation. Yet the request remained. Around the cabin, the silence grew heavier than before. The retired Air Force veteran lowered his eyes, disappointed by what he was witnessing. The older woman beside the window slowly removed her glasses and whispered to herself, "Some lessons never seem to end." Those words reached Marcus more deeply than anyone realized. For an instant the cabin disappeared from his mind. He was 12 years old again, standing beside his father inside another airport terminal decades earlier. He remembered his father's neatly pressed jacket, the careful way he carried himself, and the excitement of taking their first business trip together. He also remembered the employee who questioned whether they belonged in the premium boarding line despite holding valid tickets. Marcus could still hear his father's calm voice refusing to answer disrespect with anger. After they finally reached their seats, his father had looked out the window and quietly said, "Son, never let another person's assumptions decide your value. Spend your life building something so strong that prejudice cannot erase it, but never forget the people who cannot defend themselves the way you someday will." Marcus had carried those words through every scholarship, every promotion, every impossible meeting where he had been mistaken for someone other than the person leading the room. They had become the foundation of the company he eventually built and the leader he chose to become. Returning to the present, he met the supervisor's eyes without resentment. "My father taught me that respect is tested when it costs something," he said softly. "Today it appears everyone here is taking that test." The younger flight attendant lowered her gaze, clearly uncomfortable. She understood now that this had moved far beyond a reservation number. The gate agent shifted uneasily between the crew and the passengers, sensing that every additional minute increased the weight of the decision. Even the businessman who had criticized Marcus earlier stopped smiling. Confidence was slowly giving way to uncertainty as the evidence refused to support the assumptions made only minutes before. The lead flight attendant remained determined. "We cannot delay departure any longer," she insisted. "Please step into the jet bridge while we resolve this." Marcus reached into his pocket, not for another document but for his phone. He held it loosely in his hand without unlocking the screen. There was no anger in his movements and no desire to embarrass anyone. He had hoped the truth would emerge on its own. He had hoped someone inside the system would choose fairness before authority. Looking around the cabin one final time, he realized that moment had not yet arrived. If accountability was going to begin, it would have to begin with a conversation that extended far beyond the walls of this airplane. Marcus unlocked his phone with the same calm precision he had shown since boarding. There was no dramatic gesture, no attempt to draw attention. If anything, his movements became even quieter. The lead flight attendant noticed the phone and immediately assumed he was calling customer service. "Sir, you are welcome to contact the airline after we resolve this matter," she said. Marcus looked up briefly. "I am contacting the airline." Those 6 words landed differently than anyone expected. He selected a single number that was not saved under a name but memorized long ago. The call connected before the second ring. "Good afternoon," a composed voice answered. Marcus spoke evenly, almost as though discussing an ordinary business meeting. "This is Marcus Ellington. Please connect me with the board operations line. Activate Priority Executive Protocol 7. There was a brief pause. "Yes, Mr. Ellington. Connecting you now." Marcus thanked the operator and waited without another word. The supervisor exchanged a puzzled glance with the lead flight attendant. Neither recognized the terminology. They assumed it was an attempt to sound important. The businessman across the aisle smiled again, whispering to his wife, "Everyone knows someone on the phone." Marcus heard him but offered no response. He had learned years ago that confidence never needed to compete with skepticism. Hundreds of miles away at the airline headquarters, a secure operations desk received the incoming priority request. A red notification appeared across one monitor, automatically overriding routine customer service queues. The operations manager frowned as he read the caller identification. He stood immediately. "Get executive relations," he instructed. "Now." Within seconds another call reached the office of the airline's chief executive officer. A senior assistant interrupted an internal strategy meeting. "Sir, Priority Executive Protocol 7 has been activated." The room fell silent. Everyone around the conference table understood exactly what that protocol meant. It had only been established weeks earlier after the company's newest strategic investor requested direct emergency access whenever service failures involving executive oversight occurred. Back on the aircraft, none of that activity was visible. Marcus simply stood beside Seat 2 Alpha with his phone held comfortably against his ear. The younger flight attendant studied him more closely now. His breathing never changed. His shoulders remained relaxed. Whatever conversation was happening, it was clearly not ordinary. The gate agent's device suddenly vibrated with an incoming message from operations requesting that boarding remain paused until further notice. She looked at the screen twice before showing it to the supervisor. His expression shifted for the first time. "Operations wants us to wait," she whispered. They did not explain why. The lead flight attendant frowned. "That makes no sense. They wanted us to finish boarding." Another alert appeared moments later, this time requesting that no changes be made to the passenger manifest until executive authorization was received. The supervisor stared at the words in disbelief. Executive authorization was almost never required for a boarding dispute. The retired Air Force veteran quietly folded his hands together and looked toward Marcus with renewed curiosity. The older woman by the window smiled faintly, sensing that the truth had finally begun catching up with the assumptions that had filled the cabin. Marcus listened as another familiar voice came onto the line. "Good afternoon, Mr. Ellington. The board operations team is assembled. How would you like to proceed?" Marcus glanced once around the silent first-class cabin before answering with the same steady composure that had never left him. "Please begin by listening. Everyone involved deserves the opportunity to hear exactly what happened before anyone decides what should happen next." The voice on the phone remained calm and unmistakably respectful. "Mr. Ellington, the chairman and the chief executive officer are joining the line now." Marcus answered quietly. "Thank you." He switched the call to speaker, not to embarrass anyone but because transparency had become more valuable than privacy. A composed voice immediately filled the silent cabin. "Marcus, this is Daniel Prescott. I understand there has been an incident before departure." The name alone meant nothing to most passengers, but every airline employee in the aisle instantly recognized it. Daniel Prescott was the chief executive officer of the airline. The supervisor's face lost its confidence. The lead flight attendant slowly lowered her hands from where they had been folded across her chest. Marcus replied with the same measured tone he had used from the beginning. "There has been an opportunity to observe how assumptions can replace verification." Another voice entered the call, older and equally composed. "This is Richard Langford, chairman of the board. We have reviewed your investment agreement. As the holder of the company's largest strategic ownership position, your observations will be documented immediately." The younger flight attendant covered her mouth in quiet disbelief. The gate agent looked at Marcus, then back at the phone, as if trying to understand how the ordinary passenger standing beside seat 2 Alpha had suddenly become the most influential person connected to the flight. Even the businessman who had dismissed him earlier leaned forward, unable to hide his surprise. Daniel Prescott continued. "Captain, if you can hear this through the cabin communication system, please remain at the gate until Executive Operations completes its review." A moment later the cockpit door opened slightly and the captain stepped into the aisle. His expression was professional but noticeably concerned. "Yes, sir," he answered toward the phone. Daniel Prescott asked one direct question. "Captain, has this passenger presented a valid boarding pass?" The captain looked toward the supervisor, who finally answered honestly. "Yes. We have not found any evidence that the ticket is invalid." There was a pause on the line before the chief executive officer spoke again. "Then may I ask why he has not been seated?" No one answered immediately. The silence itself became the explanation. Richard Langford finally broke it. "Marcus, I believe everyone present deserves to know why your visit was scheduled today." Marcus nodded once, although no one on the call could see him. 3 weeks ago, I requested permission to travel anonymously because customer reports suggested that appearance was influencing service standards. I wanted facts rather than presentations." Another long silence settled over the cabin. Every employee understood the significance of those words. This had never been an unexpected confrontation. It had been a routine passenger experience that happened to involve the company's largest investor. The retired Air Force veteran slowly smiled, not because anyone had been proven wrong, but because the truth had finally spoken for itself. The older woman by the window quietly whispered, "Respect should never require a title." Marcus heard her and gave the slightest nod. Daniel Prescott returned to the conversation. "Mr. Ellington, on behalf of the airline, I sincerely apologize for what you have experienced today. Effective immediately, Executive Operations will assume responsibility for this matter." Marcus looked around the cabin once more. Every face that had once carried certainty now reflected something very different. Some showed regret. Others showed disbelief. A few simply lowered their eyes. No announcement had revealed his success. No expensive suit had earned their respect. The only thing that had changed was that the truth had finally reached the people who had the authority to recognize it. For several long seconds no one moved. The aircraft cabin, which only moments earlier had been filled with quiet certainty, now seemed suspended in complete silence. The lead flight attendant slowly lowered her eyes, replaying every decision she had made since Marcus stepped through the boarding door. Each instruction that had once sounded routine now echoed differently in her mind. The supervisor took a careful breath before speaking. "Mr. Ellington, I owe you an apology." Marcus looked at him with the same calm expression he had carried from the beginning. "An apology matters when it becomes the beginning of change," he replied. "Otherwise it is only another sentence." Those words settled over the cabin with more weight than anyone expected. Daniel Prescott remained on the speakerphone. "Executive Operations has already initiated a formal service review. Every statement, every system record, and every communication from today's boarding process will be preserved for evaluation. This review is not about punishment. It is about making certain every customer receives equal treatment." The captain nodded respectfully. "Understood." The younger flight attendant quietly stepped toward Marcus. "Sir, I should have spoken sooner," she admitted. "I saw the reservation was correct, but I allowed uncertainty to silence me." Marcus offered a small understanding smile. "You eventually chose facts over assumptions. That decision still matters." She nodded gratefully, realizing that integrity was often measured by the courage to speak when remaining silent felt easier. The businessman who had dismissed Marcus throughout the ordeal slowly stood from his seat. His confident posture had disappeared. "I judged you before I knew anything about you," he said honestly. "I was wrong." Marcus met his eyes without resentment. "The important question is whether you will judge the next stranger differently." The man lowered his head. "I will." Nearby, the older woman who had defended fairness from the beginning smiled softly. "That is how real change begins," she said. "One decision at a time." Airport operations personnel quietly arrived at the aircraft door but remained outside, allowing the cabin crew to complete the conversation with dignity. No one rushed inside. No dramatic scene unfolded. Instead, professionalism slowly replaced tension. The gate agent received another notification on her device confirming that Seat 2 Alpha remained assigned to Marcus Ellington exactly as originally issued. She looked toward him and spoke with complete confidence. "Mr. Ellington, whenever you are ready, we would be honored to welcome you aboard." It was the first invitation he had received since arriving at the aircraft. Marcus walked the few remaining steps to his seat without celebration. He placed his small carry-on bag into the overhead compartment, took his place beside the window, and fastened his seat belt with the same quiet composure he had shown throughout the afternoon. No applause filled the cabin. No one cheered. The silence itself carried far greater meaning. Every passenger had witnessed how quickly assumptions could shape reality and how patiently truth could restore it. Before ending the call, Daniel Prescott spoke once more. "Marcus, thank you for allowing us to see this through your eyes rather than through another report. Today will influence more than this flight." Marcus looked out the window as the late afternoon sunlight reflected across the runway. "That was always the purpose," he answered. "The goal was never to expose people. It was to improve the experience for those who board after me, especially the ones whose voices are rarely heard before someone decides where they belong." The aircraft door finally closed with a quiet click, and for the first time since Marcus had stepped aboard, the cabin felt exactly as it should have from the beginning. The engine slowly came to life, but no one reached for a magazine or returned to a conversation. The silence carried its own lesson. As the airplane pushed back from the gate, Marcus looked through the window at the terminal growing smaller in the afternoon light. He thought about his father, about a promise made decades earlier by a young boy who had watched dignity questioned simply because of appearances. That promise had never been about wealth. It had never been about influence. It had always been about making sure the next person would not have to endure the same experience. A few moments later, the captain's voice came over the cabin speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience today. We appreciate your understanding, and we are committed to treating every passenger with professionalism and respect." It was a brief announcement, but everyone on board understood it carried far more meaning than the usual welcome. The younger flight attendant approached Marcus with a glass of water. "Thank you for your patience, sir," she said quietly. Marcus accepted it with a warm smile. "Thank you for choosing integrity when it mattered." She nodded, understanding that one decision had changed not only the course of the afternoon but also the course of her own career. Across the aisle, the businessman looked out the window before turning toward Marcus one last time. "I will remember today for a long time," he admitted. Marcus answered gently. "Then make sure you remember the lesson more than the embarrassment." The man smiled with genuine humility. "I will." The retired Air Force veteran extended his hand across the aisle. Marcus shook it firmly. "Your father would be proud," the veteran said. Marcus paused before replying. "Everything I tried to become started with something he taught me many years ago." As the aircraft climbed above the clouds, sunlight poured through the windows, filling the cabin with a quiet warmth that seemed different from before. No title had changed who Marcus was. No phone call had created his dignity. Those things had only revealed what had always been there. True character had never depended on recognition. It existed long before anyone decided to acknowledge it. Weeks later, new service standards, expanded training, and revised passenger verification procedures would quietly roll out across the airline. Most future travelers would never know why those changes had been made. They would simply experience a little more fairness, a little more patience, and a little more respect. Marcus preferred it that way. Real leadership was not measured by how many people knew your name. It was measured by how many lives became better because you chose responsibility over revenge. Before closing his laptop to prepare for the meeting waiting at his destination, Marcus looked once more through the window at the endless sky and remembered the words that had guided him throughout his life. Respect is never a luxury reserved for the powerful. It is the minimum every human being deserves before anyone knows their title, their income, or the color of their skin. Some passengers reached their destination carrying luggage. Marcus hoped they also carried something far more valuable, the understanding that the strongest measure of a person is not where they are invited to sit, but how they choose to treat the stranger standing beside them.